Hey everyone, it's me, your boy, Jason, back here in Russellville, Alabama.
That's Will, I'm Jason. I've seen it, I know how this works.
I'm Will.
Yeah.
You're Jason.
You're Jerry.
This secondary studio, Will, I gotta tell you, is nice.
Secondary studio.
Wow.
Primary bits.
Jason, I'm telling you, this is a nice setup you got here. I'm telling you, we are having a good old time here with my good friend Jason.
This is
in Russellville, Alabama. Whew.
Big step up. Last visit, we hung out in a shed.
Is it? I mean, it's classier, but I enjoyed that rapey shed, if I'm being honest.
It was only...
This guy put handprints up all over one of the walls, and like his wife came in and looked at it, and like I was looking at it, and we were both sitting there like, man, what's wrong with Will? And then I guess I was hoping it was still there because I thought it was hilarious, but I guess he took it down shortly after the judgment.
I respond well to criticism. I correct my behaviors. Today, we're going to be exploring some of my video game wrestling collection. I have to limit myself on what I collect so I don't end up in the same shape as Jason with a store full of stuff.
Glorious?
Thousands of VHSs. It is an envious thing, but I know I very quickly could be in your condition. So I've given myself some rules. I typically only collect wrestling things, and I try not to spend more than $10 on any one item. And I think everything here today has been below $10. This is all video game stuff, almost primarily from the 90s. But the first thing we have is from 1986 Sega of America, simply Pro Wrestling. Now this was on the Master System. This was before the Genesis, Sega's 8-bit contender to the Nintendo Entertainment System. And it's just a really cool thing because sometimes these are harder to find. And I think this was $3. And this came from Game Galore in Huntsville, where a lot of this stuff has came from. Still has the book, pretty basic black and white 80s instructions, and the basic 80s Sega cartridge. But just really cool. You know, from a time when they didn't even have to have a license. They just said pro wrestling, and that was enough to get people to buy stuff without even having legit wrestlers there.
I love the idea of a self headlock on that cover. That's very cool.
Yes, self headlock.
Great.
One
Sega.
opponent, one-on-one. Chong-esque.
Next up, we got handhelds. I don't know much about this one. What I love about this is Stone Cold was so big, they didn't think they needed to put another wrestler up. They're just like, let's put really two crappy pictures of like our biggest guy ever. And so it's like, I mean, neither of those pictures are like...
Not his best look.
No, they're both kind of strange. I never really played it. This one, I got crazy nostalgia for this style. Being in recess in elementary, Sheridan, you got me, you got you got your Brian Sylvesters, your Matt Dunakakis, your Luke Andrews. And this one, and like Knight Rider and Bigfoot of this exact style floated around. Oh, man, I'm telling you, I don't know if these hold up, but these, man, I remember a lot of time with this style of game.
And I remember being occupied by those things for quite a bit of time, and they're so simple now they can't hold your attention span for 45 seconds.
No, our attention spans are shot. Mine is just shot.
Along those lines, probably next, you know, from the handheld single games came the Game Boy, and I want to tell what happened because we went up in January, hung out at the store, and I kind of got that collector.
The primary Adventures in Pop
Culture. The primary set. And I got the bug just from being around that much stuff and came back to Game Galore in Huntsville. And I wound up leaving that day with, this is most of the original Game Boy wrestling collection.
Nice.
WWF Attitude for the Game Boy Color, WWF Raw for regular Game Boy, WrestleMania 2000 for the Game Boy Color, WWF Superstars for the regular Game Boy, WWF Betrayal, which is a side-scroller beat-em-up.
I kind of want to put that in.
Battletoads-esque wrestling game.
Is it fun?
I have no idea. I bought this stuff knowing I would probably never touch it, and
I know that game.
Instant remorse. Just get in the car and say, "Why did I just do that?" But as Jason likes to say, it is cool just to know you have it.
Yeah.
King of the Ring for the original Game Boy, Warzone for the original Game Boy, and Inbox Raw for the original Game Boy.
That thing's pretty minty, isn't it?
And I can't remember. All these were like $2 a piece, and I think I played every one of them for 30 seconds just to see what they were like. But it is cool to have. Now, what I don't have is there's a WCW original Game Boy game that is absolutely terrible because I've played it on emulators, but I would really like to see that. Never saw it in the wild.
Never, huh?
Never.
Who's on the cover of it?
Stinger.
That makes sense.
You know, Surf Dude.
Surf Dude Sting?
Because it's probably from 89 or 90.
Let's go through these Nintendo ones. Now, how many of these are you missing?
I believe that I have the full American release of every wrestling game, not just WWF.
So we're looking at...
But every wrestling game for the Nintendo Entertainment System. It's eight games.
Nice.
To the best of my knowledge.
Let's go through these. Was Pro Wrestling the first? There was some controversy when I thought this was the first one on one of our early videos, but it was like Tag Team Wrestling was actually first?
It may have been. I'm not sure.
Like I don't remember.
Probably the most well-known because it was so early on.
Yeah.
You had Starman and all. You know, people remember that game that aren't into wrestling.
Yeah. I'll go through my pile here. King of the Ring. I'm not familiar with this one. I'm familiar with a lot of these. Not familiar with this.
It's like a late in the life cycle of the Nintendo Entertainment System when Bret Hart had become the man.
94-ish, 93-ish?
Yeah, probably along those lines.
Okay. This one is the most iconic to me. This cover. And man, I remember having so much fun with this. Ugh, I know it wouldn't hold up now, but I just remember playing this a lot. And you got Steel Cage Challenge. I kind of remember this one. It was just this. The only thing they added was basically a steel cage match, right?
And that would sell a game back then, like one additional feature, and people would just have to have it and beg their parents. And
isn't this one kind of an anomaly because like the selection, they were kind of on the decline, and it was really strange wrestlers, like no Hogan. Oh no, there's Hogan. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and
moving on.
It would take years. Like a lot of those guys would probably have jumped ship to WCW by the time the game came out.
Yeah, I know. I think there's one.
So this is Tecmo World Wrestling. It has some interesting graphics, not the best gameplay, but it's along those lines. And I think I picked that up in Muscle Shoals actually at Replays. WCW is my favorite wrestling promotion of all time. The now defunct, out of business WCW. But this is from right when it became WCW from NWA.
Oh, nice.
And the Road Warriors were like the big thing. Not the best game, but really cool 80s art, that pink style, you know.
Yeah.
The tag team wrestling that Jason mentioned earlier from Data East. And if this isn't so early on in the life cycle, because I think it's like 4 guys and you don't even get to pick the guys. It automatically just gives you one of the guys. Like if you wanted to be the other guy, you had to be second player.
Oh, really?
No match modes, any of that stuff.
Huh.
And then today in Huntsville, at I think it's Game Depot, I completed the collection and got WrestleMania Challenge.
Nice.
At the same boat that these guys talk about. I couldn't remember if I had this or not, and was really happy to pick it up. I think that's a full collection. Somebody will probably comment and correct.
There's not like, okay, yeah, I mean, no, it's going to happen. But you got a nice collection.
I've Googled it, but it's been so long and my memory's so bad that who knows.
Yeah. Next up, let's talk about your inbox Super Nintendo one. How many Super Nintendo ones do you have?
I don't know, because a few of them are in Dalton's room.
Yeah.
In Super Nintendo, you get into some of the imports, and it's hard to find.
I remember playing Royal Rumble at your house when you first got the Super Nintendo, and loving that Royal Rumble format. Do you remember? Here's a memory. I remember my mom and my dad told me if I hit a home run in Little League Baseball, they would buy me a Super Nintendo. And I remember sitting at that plate thinking, like, you know, I mean, shit could happen. And just, like, praying I would hit a home run. And it would, I mean, they knew. You know, man, you kind of think about that, like, Mom, Dad, that was mean. You know? Yeah. I was never going to hit a home run.
It was probably, like, encouragement.
Yeah, I guess that's what you call it. But, they knew they weren't going to have to shell out the money for a Super Nintendo. Let's take a look at these strategy guides. Now, this was before the internet. And so if you wanted to know how to play these new Nintendo 64 wrestling games, this was your ticket.
It was the only way at the time, besides like asking somebody on the playground. And kids were so full of it back then. You were talking about that Royal Rumble game. I remember kids on the playground swearing that they had beat a guy so bad that like an ambulance came out and took him out in a stretcher. And then we would spend hours trying to make that happen, and it just was absolutely impossible, you know. I know I lied too. I mean, everybody did. And like hearing things about like you could do a Mortal Kombat, man, everybody just lied out of your teeth. And I was fully aware that everybody else was lying, but I thought Jason wouldn't lie to me.
I'm sure I did. I think I was one of the lighter offenders, but yeah, this was how you learned how to play these new games.
But really cool stuff, and strategy guides would come out a couple months before the game sometimes. And so, especially for a new wrestling game, I would get the strategy guide and just study over it. Like, if I would have applied myself to something practical, I could have been a doctor or something. But I would spend hours studying wrestling moves for no apparent reason.
We wouldn't still be playing these. We just got done playing these.
Yeah, we're just playing them, and I wouldn't still be a doctor. I'd be fired by now. Yeah. So the hot wrestling game now, the big thing for the die-hard wrestling video game players is Fire Pro Wrestling. And that's a long-running series that came out, I believe, first on the Super Nintendo. And it's released in Japan primarily, and they would get around the trademarks and copyrights by having wrestlers like Bulk Bogan and like Andy the Giant, the Tundraker, and then they had a feature where you could go in and edit their name, and so you would have a wrestling game that had guys from WWF, WCW, and like New Japan Pro Wrestling, and just make an insane roster before create a roster. But the thing was, as an American, you would have to import that, which is ridiculous at the time. You would have to have an imported Super Nintendo and then the imported game, because they would make the slots different. Like a Japanese game wouldn't just fit into an American Super Nintendo.
Sure.
And then you would have to understand enough Japanese to at least like get into the game modes. So there are people that like this more than I do, because I could never took it to that. But it is cool to go back.
Surprisingly little Japanese.
Very little Japanese. I know. Please stop. That's about it. Like an import. So this would have been something amazing, a dream in like 4th, 5th grade, and now I picked this up. I think for $6 at Game Depot in Huntsville. Super Fire Pro. The thing about this game is, in the story mode, it has a famous ending, because when you end the career mode, your guy kills himself in shame.
Seriously?
You're like world champion, he loses. Like you win the last match, and then it just cuts to like a cinematic of him losing the belt and then going home and killing himself.
That's crazy.
That is the actual ending. You can YouTube it.
Wow.
And so eventually they brought these. Same thing. This is a Fire Pro that came out on Game Boy, Japanese version. And they brought these to America with Fire Pro Wrestling Returns on the PlayStation 2. The thing about Fire Pro Wrestling is people edit these character packs now and rings to where you can have any ring that's ever been thought of, any wrestler that's ever been thought of. I think there's 500 character slots. And
wow.
And with USB being on a PlayStation now, you download the character packs on a USB stick, and you can just have tons of those sticks. And it's not just how many guys there are. The gameplay is really, really fun. Kind of hard to learn, but really fun to get into. And so this came out. This was $15 new when it came out. Fire Pro Wrestling Returns wasn't a big release, and so now sometimes they're like $30 to find them in the wild. And I think I bought this new for $15 when it came out.
Nice.
So that's all the wrestling video games, and it's fun to have something to collect. You know, to have like to go into a big thrift store thinking I might find this one thing.
Your white whale.
Yeah, the white whale.
Yeah.
To limit yourself.
It's a great collection. It really is. Nice talking to you. Glad to know you haven't turned into an enormous a-hole. Too sweet!
Two brothers in Nebraska, pop culture's what they love. Join them as they talk about all of their cool stuff. Adventures in pop culture.